In September of 1969, miners working 70 meters below ground in Siberia's coalfields struck something impossible. Not coal, not rock. A marble sarcophagus, 2 meters long, sealed and preserved inside a coal seam, formed hundreds of millions of years before humans were supposed to exist. What they found inside would trigger a military lockdown, a systematic erasure of evidence, and the deaths of everyone who discovered it. The village of Rzhavchik sits forgotten in Russia's Kemerovo Oblast. 200 people, a few dozen crumbling houses, the kind of place where time doesn't move forward so much as it simply stops. Before World War II, they tried mining coal here, but the seam proved worthless and the operation shut down. What remained was an overgrown quarry, abandoned, unremarkable, until a miner named Kornuoho, working deep in that forsaken pit, broke through into something that shouldn't exist. The foreman, Alexander Masavigin, ordered work stopped immediately. They hauled the sarcophagus to the surface. Under direct sunlight, the seal between the lid and base began melting into transparent liquid, dripping onto the ground. When they removed the lid, witnesses saw something that violated every principle of decomposition and time. The coffin was filled with a pink-blue crystalline liquid, perfectly clear, and suspended in that liquid was a woman. She appeared 30 years old, tall around 180 centimeters, slender build, European features, blue eyes spaced wide apart. She wore a white lace dress that fell just below her knees, short sleeves embroidered with coloured flowers. The fabric appeared handmade, delicate, impossibly preserved, but here's what stopped everyone cold. She didn't look dead. She looked asleep, as if she might open those blue eyes at any moment and ask what year it was. The entire village came to see her. Officials, firefighters, soldiers, police. Word spread fast. Then a brick-coloured helicopter arrived from the regional capital, carrying a dozen men in plain clothes, who immediately declared the site hazardous and ordered everyone back. They cordoned off the area. Anyone who touched the sarcophagus or stood nearby was told to report for urgent medical examination. The uniformity of their response suggested they'd been waiting for exactly this kind of discovery. They tried loading the sarcophagus into the helicopter, but the weight proved too much. Someone made a decision that revealed either remarkable stupidity or deliberate testing. They drained the liquid to reduce the load. The moment the liquid left the coffin, the woman's body began turning black. Rapid oxidation, tissue breakdown, the normal process of death finally catching up after being suspended for an incomprehensible amount of time. Then they reversed course, pouring the liquid back in, and the blackening stopped. Within 60 seconds, colour returned to her skin. The lifelike appearance restored itself, as if death itself could be paused and resumed at will. Think about what that means. This wasn't embalming fluid. Watched a dead woman come back to the edge. Watched a dead woman come back to the edge of life, simply by reintroducing the liquid that surrounded her. The helicopter took everything. The sarcophagus, the woman, the liquid, even the soil and fragments of the seal, all packed into plastic bags as if they were collecting evidence from a crime scene. The witnesses were dismissed. The site was cleared. And then the systematic erasure began. 5 days later, a professor from Novosibirsk arrived in Rzhavchik. He gave a lecture at the village club, presenting preliminary laboratory findings. According to him, Soviet scientists would soon publish results that would shock the scientific world. The age of the burial, he stated with apparent certainty, was at least 800 million years old. The fabric of the woman's dress resisted all attempts at analysis. The composition of the pink-blue liquid couldn't be determined, though they'd identified trace elements suggesting ancient varieties of onion and garlic as components. But there was something else. At the head of the woman, they'd found a black rectangular metal box, 25 by 10 centimeters, rounded on one edge. The professor said nothing about this box except that it was being studied. That silence is telling. When you find something you can't explain, you either admit ignorance or you stop talking about it entirely. 2 days after the lecture, A small article appeared in the local district newspaper. Brief, factual, mentioning an archaeological discovery near Rozavchik that would shed light on human history. Then the military cordoned off the entire Tisulski district. Police went door to door, confiscating every copy of that newspaper they could find. The quarry where the sarcophagus was discovered was excavated thoroughly and buried under tons of earth. Some villagers refused to stay silent. One man visited multiple authorities, wrote letters to the Central Committee of the Communist Party, demanded answers. A year later, he died suddenly. Heart failure, according to the official report. Then the other discoverers started dying. Car accidents, all of them. Over the course of 12 months, all 6 men who'd first found the sarcophagus were dead. The remaining witnesses understood the message perfectly and never spoke publicly about what they'd seen again. Human beings don't survive 800 million years. Coal seams form from organic material compressed over geological timescales that predate complex life. Finding a preserved woman inside one is like discovering a smartphone in a dinosaur fossil. It breaks causality. And when you find something that shouldn't exist, you have 2 choices. You can either investigate what doesn't fit, or you can bury it. The Soviet authorities chose the latter, but they didn't stop at covering the quarry site. In 1973, 4 years after the sarcophagus disappeared, massive excavations began around Lake Berchikul, approximately 6 kilometers from where the marble tomb was found. From summer through late autumn, crews worked under military guard in complete secrecy. No public announcements, no archaeological reports, just digging, searching, removing. What were they looking for? More importantly, what did they find? The excavations focused on the shores and islands of the lake, suggesting they expected to discover something similar or connected to the original find. If you uncover one impossible artifact in a coal seam, the logical question becomes whether there are others nearby. The military doesn't deploy that kind of security for routine archaeological work. They don't maintain silence about discoveries unless those discoveries threaten something fundamental. By the time the excavations concluded, the original quarry had been permanently closed. Today, it's completely overgrown, transformed into ordinary forest. But here's what makes the timing suspicious. The quarry closure happened the same year as the Lake Berchikul excavations, as if they'd found what they were searching for and decided the entire area needed to be made inaccessible. Meanwhile, the sarcophagus itself vanished into the Soviet scientific apparatus. The official path supposedly went from Rozavchik to Novosibirsk, then to Moscow, but persistent rumors suggest a different destination entirely: Japan. The Japanese government has a documented history of acquiring unusual archaeological finds, particularly those involving unexplained human remains. They offered substantial sums for the Kishtim dwarf body, though whether that transaction ever completed remains unclear. These kinds of exchanges happen discreetly, through channels that leave no paper trail. If the Tisul princess ended up in Japanese research facilities, we'd likely never know. The professor's lecture becomes more significant when you consider what he didn't say. The fabric resisted analysis. Fine, ancient textiles can be difficult to identify if the materials have degraded beyond recognition. The liquid couldn't be fully characterized. Acceptable, given Soviet analytical limitations in the early 70s. But that metal box, 25 by 10 centimeters, black, rectangular, with one rounded edge. He mentioned it was being studied, then said nothing more. That silence speaks louder than any explanation could. When researchers encounter something genuinely baffling, they typically admit uncertainty or propose speculative theories. When they stop talking about something entirely, it suggests the discovery is too problematic to discuss publicly. And here's where the story takes a turn into territory that seems almost mythological until you examine the details. Some researchers notice similarities between the Tisul discovery and Alexander Pushkin's poem, The Tale of the Dead Princess and the Seven Bogatyrs. Written in 1833, the poem describes a crystal coffin suspended in a mountain cave, containing a sleeping princess. The parallels are striking enough that you have to wonder whether Pushkin had access to information about similar discoveries. Writers often encode real knowledge in fictional frameworks, especially when that knowledge is dangerous to state directly. The Kemerovo region itself provides context that makes the discovery slightly less impossible. This area ranks among the oldest geological formations on Earth. The Kia River nearby contains whitestone gravel and mineral springs that date back to the Devonian period. Ancient volcanic sea remnants dot the landscape. Dinosaur graveyards have been uncovered near the village of Shestakovka. Stone Age burial mounds and cemeteries exist throughout the region. The land has a deep history, multiple layers of civilizations and extinctions compressed into stone and sediment. Finding something anomalous here is more plausible than finding it in geologically younger terrain. But 800 million years. That number deserves scrutiny because it's based on 1960s understanding of coal formation timelines. Modern geology has revised many of those estimates. Coal seams form from organic material, compressed over millions of years, not hundreds of millions. The deepest coal deposits rarely exceed 300 million years in age, so either the professor was working with outdated geological models, or the dating was deliberately exaggerated to make the find seem even more impossible. There's a third option. Maybe the sarcophagus wasn't contemporary with the coal seam at all. Maybe it was placed there much more recently, buried deliberately in a location where it would eventually be discovered, but appear impossibly ancient. That would explain the perfect preservation, the sophisticated liquid technology, the engineered seal that only degraded when exposed to sunlight. Someone with advanced knowledge could have created a time capsule designed to survive until excavation. The question becomes why? Why preserve a single woman in a marble tomb 70 meters underground in a remote Siberian coal mine? Why include a mysterious metal box? Why design the liquid to maintain her appearance so perfectly that witnesses described her as sleeping rather than dead? And why, if this was meant to be discovered, did the authorities work so hard to erase every trace of the finding? A forum post from 1974 provides an interesting detail that didn't appear in earlier accounts. A fourth-grade student at school number 76 in Kemerovo was told about the discovery by the school administrator Ekaterina Ivanovna Golovanova. The administrator mentioned the woman's condition, her clothing, the liquid preservation. She said they were waiting for detailed articles in the regional newspaper. Those articles never appeared. But this confirms the story circulated beyond Rozavchik, that educated people in larger towns knew about the finding and expected official scientific publications. The suppression wasn't just local, it was systematic, extending to preventing any mainstream coverage, even in regional publications. Other locals reported seeing a transparent, glass-like insert in the sarcophagus lid near the woman's face, scratch-resistant, perfectly clear, allowing viewers to see her features without opening the tomb. That's not ancient technology. That's something engineered with modern or postmodern materials science. Unless you accept the possibility that 800 million years ago, or 400 million, depending on which estimate you believe, someone possessed manufacturing capabilities that shouldn't have existed. The current state of the discovery site adds one final disturbing detail. Local authorities have converted the area into a massive garbage dump. Trash from surrounding districts gets hauled there regularly, piled directly over the location where the sarcophagus was found. Why bury evidence under garbage? The explanation depends on what you believe about the original discovery. If the sarcophagus was real, the dump serves as permanent concealment. Layers of refuse make excavation practically impossible. Chemical contamination from decomposing waste destroys any remaining organic traces. The site becomes legally protected as active landfill, requiring permits and environmental assessments before anyone could dig. It's brilliant in its simplicity. You can't investigate what's buried under 10,000 tons of municipal waste. If the story was fabricated from the beginning, the dump serves a different purpose. It prevents verification. Anyone attempting to debunk the legend by excavating the site now faces an insurmountable obstacle. The lack of evidence becomes explainable. Of course, there's nothing to find. Look at all this garbage. The mystery remains permanently unresolved, neither confirmed nor denied. Either way, someone made a calculated decision about that specific location. The death pattern among witnesses deserves closer examination. 6 discoverers dead within 1 year, all in vehicle accidents. Statistically improbable, but not impossible. Small communities experience clusters of tragedy. Roads in rural Siberia are dangerous. Drink was common. Perhaps the coincidence is genuine. But one detail troubles that explanation. The activist who wrote to the Central Committee died of heart failure exactly 1 year after beginning his campaign. Heart attacks happen. Stress accelerates them. Fighting bureaucracy is stressful, yet the timing aligns too perfectly with the vehicle deaths, as if someone waited to see if natural causes would silence him before implementing more direct methods. The remaining witnesses fell silent immediately after. Not gradually, not after additional deaths occurred over years. Immediately. That suggests they received a message they understood clearly. The 1973 excavations at Lake Birchikul present another puzzle. Why return 4 years later? Why conduct massive secret operations 6 kilometers from the original site? 3 possibilities emerge. First, they found something in the sarcophagus that indicated more discoveries nearby. The metal box perhaps contained coordinates or maps. The liquid's chemical composition might have pointed to a specific water source. Something directed them to the lake. Second, the entire operation was theatre. Dig conspicuously near the discovery site to convince locals the matter was being taken seriously, while actually finding nothing and closing the case officially. Third, they succeeded. They found whatever they were looking for, extracted it under military guard, and classified everything so thoroughly that even rumours didn't escape. The quarry closure that same year supports the third option. Shut down the coal operation, restrict access, let nature reclaim the site. Within a generation, physical memory of the location fades. The forest covers everything. Contemporary Soviet media carried brief mentions of the discovery. Technique of Youth ran stories about anomalous finds. Komsomolskaya Pravda published something. These weren't fringe publications. They were mainstream, state-approved, widely distributed. For the story to appear there at all means someone initially approved its release. Then the reversal came. Newspapers confiscated. Articles never followed up. The brief window of official acknowledgement slammed shut. What changed between initial approval and subsequent suppression? Did analysis reveal something unexpected? Did international attention force a different approach? Did internal political calculation shift? Or was the limited release itself strategic? Seed the story in credible sources, then suppress it, creating the perfect conditions for legend. A tale with just enough documentation to seem real, but not enough to verify. Conspiracy theorists would spread it. Skeptics would dismiss it. The truth would remain permanently obscured by competing narratives. The connection to Pushkin's poem adds a literary dimension that feels almost too perfect. A crystal coffin, a sleeping princess, a remote location. The parallels are striking, but Pushkin wrote in the early 1800s about fairy tales and folklore. If his poems somehow predicted or described a real discovery in Siberia a century later, that raises questions about the sources of his inspiration. Russian folklore contains numerous tales of sleeping beauties, enchanted princesses, magical preservation. Perhaps the 1969 discovery tapped into deep cultural archetypes. Perhaps witnesses unconsciously shaped their accounts to match familiar narrative patterns. Memory is unreliable, especially when processing extraordinary events. Or perhaps the folklore preserved actual historical memory. Stories passed down through generations about real discoveries, real preservation technologies, real evidence of something that existed long before modern civilization. The Japanese connection, if it exists, points toward a pattern. Advanced nations acquiring anomalous artifacts through unofficial channels. Private collectors paying enormous sums for objects that challenge accepted history. Museums and governments maintaining public skepticism while securing items for classified study. We can't verify any of it. The body, if it existed, is gone. The witnesses are dead or silent. The site is buried under trash. The official records were confiscated or destroyed. The photographs, if they were taken, never surfaced publicly. What remains is a story too detailed to dismiss entirely, too unverifiable to accept completely. A story that asks uncomfortable questions about what lies beneath our feet, about what previous civilizations might have achieved, about what authorities decide the public should and shouldn't know. The Teasel Princess exists now primarily as legend. But legends often contain fragments of truth. The challenge is separating the fragments from the embellishments, the actual events from the interpretations imposed on them later. Somewhere in Siberia, beneath a garbage dump, there may or may not be evidence of something that shouldn't exist, according to every timeline we've constructed. And whether that evidence is real or imagined, the fact that we can't access it to find out tells its own story about the nature of forbidden knowledge. The story refuses to resolve cleanly. Every answer generates 3 new questions. Every explanation leaves gaps large enough to drive theories through. That's the nature of discoveries that get buried, literally and figuratively, before proper investigation can occur. What actually happened in Brzovchik in September 1969? A marble sarcophagus emerged from coal-seam depths that predate human existence. Inside, a woman preserved in liquid that defied analysis, wearing fabric that resisted identification, accompanied by a metal box no one will discuss. Then military helicopters arrived, witnesses died, records vanished, and the site became a garbage dump. Maybe it was elaborate deception from the start. Maybe the Soviet Union manufactured the entire event for reasons we can't fathom. Maybe witnesses misremembered, exaggerated, conflated separate incidents into one impossible narrative. Or maybe something impossibly old was pulled from the earth that day, something that demonstrated preservation technology beyond our current understanding, something that suggested human civilization, or something resembling it, existed when conventional science insists only primitive life forms populated the planet. The authorities responded exactly as you'd expect if they discovered something genuinely threatening to established knowledge: immediate containment, systematic suppression, strategic elimination of evidence and witnesses. The pattern matches classified operations, not archaeological curiosity. We're left with fragments, eyewitness accounts from people who are now dead or silent, newspaper clippings that were confiscated, laboratory results that were never published, excavations conducted in secret. A woman who may have slept through hundreds of millions of years, preserved in liquid we can't replicate, buried where she couldn't possibly be. The garbage dump covering the site isn't just convenient, it's a statement. Whatever was there or whatever story emerged from there, it's buried now under the detritus of modern life. Inaccessible, unverifiable, permanently out of reach. And perhaps that's exactly how someone wanted it.